managers. Emily Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. May I begin by saying what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship, and I haven't done this before. And I'd also like to congratulate the Honourable Lady for securing this debate. I listened to her maiden speech when she was in the chamber and with great interest, and concluded that although it was highly unlikely that we were going to agree politically, I felt that she would without a doubt serve her constituents well. Indeed, the constituents that we now know as the people of the New Jerusalem, and that she was likely to be a formidable advocate for them. And frankly, this place never has enough formidable women. This debate that she has initiated is one of great importance. Over 1 in 4 households in rural areas are in fuel poverty. In sparse English communities, every second home has an energy efficiency rating of under 30. This amounts to a significant health risk. It's a knotty and difficult problem with which the Labour government has struggled. And whilst we've made progress, much more needs to be done. Our concern is that the emerging political philosophy of the coalition government may prove to be a significant handicap. That may be just putting it mildly. The coalition brags, their agreement brags, about the way in which the two governing parties are brought together by a shared ideology, which is an antithesis to government intervention. It says that they share a conviction that the days of big government are over. But there are times when government leadership is necessary, and there are times when the market will not solve the problem. Take climate change, for example. Now, climate change is in itself the ultimate failure of the market economy. There are times when we do need to intervene, and furthermore, the effectiveness of government intervention needs to be measured and needs to be quantified so that we can account to the public for the spending of their money. Now, we heard from the Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Member for Eastleigh, that he didn't have any government targets for the creation of green jobs, nor indeed did he want to borrow ours, because of a fear of seeming to copy the Soviet Union's Gosplan. But this judgment is wrong. I would ask the ministerial team to reconsider their attitude to targets, and indeed in relation to fuel poverty, my first question is this: will the coalition stay on our 2016 fuel poverty target? Or if it will not, how many people does the government intend to lift out of fuel poverty by any of their schemes in either rural or urban areas? I will, throughout my contribution, ask a number of questions of the Right Honourable Member for Bexhill and Battle, and some of them I asked in last week's debate, and during the somewhat rushed wind-ups, the Honourable Member for Wealden, I'm sure unintentionally, overlooked many of them. So I thought that therefore I might today be helpful and number the questions that I was likely to ask for ease of reference. So that's my first question. My second question relates to access to the grid and fuel poverty. The number of off-gas properties is much higher in rural areas. This means that they are dependent on solid fuels, heating oil and LNG. Their prices are higher and fluctuate more than those for gas. Those households on the off-gas network face typical energy bills of £1,700 per annum, as opposed to £1,000 per annum for those on mains gas. So, question number 2, what steps will the government take to increase the number of homes on the gas grid? Another problem is that rural areas have lower average wage levels than urban areas. The take-up of government assistance has been more difficult in rural areas. It costs more for contractors to install energy efficiency measures in rural homes, and there's evidence that many of the consumers in rural areas are less aware of the availability of financial support. So my third question is, how does the Minister intend to tackle this problem, especially in the light of recent budget cuts to the Energy Savings Trust? Another problem for rural areas is, as we've heard from many of the contributions, there are fewer cavity walls in these areas. Solid walls are harder to heat and more expensive. So my fourth question is, what consideration has the government given to the arguments in favour of making grants available to the rural poor who cannot be connected to the grid so that they can install micro-generation pumps, such as ground source heat pumps? And will the government consider the findings of the warm front pilots with air source heat pumps in areas of gas off the gas network with occupants again in fuel poverty? I do encourage the government to be proactive and to be confident and to take action. You can get results. If one looks at the Labour achievements in relation to fuel poverty, over 2 million families or households were assisted by Warm Front since 2000, with the National Energy Action describing it as an extremely successful programme. Despite earlier problems, with take-up of the scheme, improvements have been made and the number of grants have increased in the 2005 to 2008 period. I listened with interest to the Honourable Lady's criticisms of Warm Front, but I do believe that it's somewhat overstating the case to say that rural communities like hers lose out in schemes over and over again. In the last 5 years, Warm Fronts has helped 2,000 households in the Honourable Lady's constituency of Suffolk Coastal. My fifth question is, could the government give his assurance that the Warm Front scheme will be retained? Under CERT, the major energy suppliers had an obligation to direct at least 40% of carbon savings to priority group households. My sixth question is, could the Minister clarify whether the super priority group of 15% that was announced on the 30th of June is in addition to the 40% priority group or contained within it? My seventh question is, what will the Minister do to ensure that CERT takes account of the greater difficulty and cost of insulation in rural areas? In the Energy Act 2010, Labour put a statutory obligation upon energy suppliers to offer social tariffs to those in fuel poverty. Under Labour, Ofgem provided incentives for gas networks to connect deprived communities. Households assisted under the scheme qualified as being within the 20% of the index of multiple deprivation. Yes, of course.
Giving way. She talks about the incentive for gas networks to be extended and for the grid distributors to take that lead. But isn't it all the case that you need an agency or a local authority or somebody or even a group, a community group, to actually bring that forward? And does she agree with me that that's the way we should be looking now, to make sure that we have some local champions to bring that forward in these rural areas? Because Ofgem, with the greatest respect, in central London doesn't really understand some of the small communities in rural areas, and that's what needed is agencies working with local government at the local level.
Well, I believe that's right, and I believe that, in fact, many of the characteristics that the honourable gentleman refers to can be seen in the CESP programme that I will come back to in a moment. The question I was going to ask next was, given that millions of people have benefited from winter fuel payments, millions of people have benefited from winter fuel payments, and in the Honourable Lady's constituency, 29,960 received winter fuel payments. The question is, will the Minister guarantee that winter fuel payments will continue in this age of austerity? The government has recently announced the dissolution of the Commission for Rural Communities, which I agree with many members is unfortunate, particularly given that it has done a great deal of the analysis on fuel rural poverty, which has led to significant changes in energy efficiency policy to allow for better targeting of fuel-poor rural households. Everyone knows that Labour did not eliminate fuel poverty and that great challenges remain. Nevertheless, without government measures, the number of fuel-poor households would have been around 400,000 to 800,000 more in England in 2008. I have some questions on the Green Deal. And that is, could the Minister tell the House how the pay-as-you-save pilots established under the last government are going? Will they run their course and inform the government's plans or not? Is in fact the Green Deal our pay-as-you-save scheme, just with a different name, as commentators have said? There does seem to be some confusion on the issue of whether there will be any form of government subsidy to the Green Deal, and I wonder if the Minister could clear that up. Will the Green Deal be of any cost to the public purse or not? We have contradictory statements from the member for Tunbridge Wells and the member for Wealden at different times this year. Will the amount available per household be 6,500 or up to 6,500? Will it in fact be more for harder to heat homes? During the debate last week, the Honourable Gentleman told us with his characteristic enthusiasm about the potential deal on the Green Deal with companies such as Tesco's, B&Q and M&S. What are the companies going to get out of this? This is question 13. And how confident is he that the private sector will see this as a good proposition? And the most important question really is question 14, which is how will he ensure that those households who need to improve their energy efficiency take advantage of the scheme, and how will the poorest take advantage of this? How will it work with those on low incomes and those with poor credit ratings? If homes from poorer households do not take up this scheme, will he agree with me that the scheme will have failed? The Honourable Gentleman's new boss, the Secretary of State, on the 24th of June, in The Economist Energy Summit said that some people, such as the fuel poor and those in hard-to-heat homes, will need extra help because energy savings alone will not be enough. We intend to provide that help by refocusing the obligations on energy companies. Local authorities could also join with energy companies to reach those who live in houses and need it most. Insulation measures are often cheaper if implemented a street at a time, and we are planning to strengthen the government's powers to target energy insulation measures on the highest priority cases. Does this mean, therefore, that CESP is saved? Maybe you could give it another name. I have to say, personally, I've always thought that CEFT has sounded more like something that you could deal with a strong dose of antibiotics. But the scheme is a good one, and one that the government really should look at very carefully. Will it continue or not? I referred at the beginning of this speech to the profound health problems, the health issues that can arise as a result of fuel poverty. The problem is an urgent one. If we hit another severe winter, it is likely that there will be tens of thousands of excess deaths this winter. The government is under an obligation to be proactive. I hope that it will be.